thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light to guide my way.
Welcome to, or welcome back to, our study of the second coming of Jesus. If you missed the beginning of this series, I'll put a link up here for you. What did the Apostle Paul mean when he said, "The dead in Christ shall rise first," in 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 16? As we saw last week, the word first must be understood as attaching to the word then at the beginning of verse 17. It isn't that the dead in Christ rise first and then the wicked are raised 1,007 years later. Paul is saying that the dead shall not precede those who are alive and remain at that coming. That's the important point he made in verse 15. Hal Lindsey spoke of drivers disappearing because they've been raptured and chaos erupting on freeways. A football player disappears just before he makes a touchdown. Students disappear from a classroom, and all of it is secretive, and people who are left behind, they have to figure out just exactly where all these people disappeared to. However, there is no secret about any of this. Paul describes it very differently in verse 16. "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God." As I noted last week, there is no implication that only the raptured will hear the noise indicated here. The objection frequently raised is that the wicked are not mentioned here. Well, in context, the wicked were not the concern of the Thessalonians. Paul is dealing with the righteous dead in chapter 4. He doesn't need to bring up the wicked in this context, but he does. Look at chapter 5. "Now as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you, for you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like birth pangs upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape." Well, what is this day of the Lord here in verses 1 through 3? The wicked are involved in this event, and this event ties to chapter 4. To be thorough, I need to answer a point made by Mark Hitchcock in his book, The End. Mr. Hitchcock argues that 1 Thessalonians 5 must be understood as a new subject because Paul begins verse 1 with the word now. Mr. Hitchcock tells us that Paul uses this Greek word repeatedly in 1 Corinthians chapters 7 through 16 to change subjects. Well, while that is true, we must beware of changing the subject beyond what Paul intended in 1 Thessalonians 5:1. Hitchcock tells us that Paul must be changing the subject from the rapture to the second coming. However, Mr. Hitchcock must first assume that those are two different events. In view of the fact that there will only be one resurrection for good and evil, according to John 5, verses 28 and 29, it would be far more reasonable to see a change in subject from the righteous to the wicked at the same event. Paul has told the Thessalonians what it will be like for the righteous. What could be more natural than going on to tell them what it will be like for the wicked? Paul's change of subject between 1 Thessalonians 4 and 5 moves from the situation of the saved to the necessity of readiness to avoid being lost. It has nothing to do with a different point in time. Notice another interesting detail. At the end of chapter 4, before Paul supposedly changes the subject, he writes, "Therefore comfort one another with these words." Verse 18. In chapter 5, as he finishes his discussion of the wicked, Paul writes, "Therefore encourage one another and build up one another, just as you also are doing." Verse 11. The word encourage in that text is the same word as comfort in chapter 4, verse 18. The fate of the wicked are being contrasted with the salvation of the righteous. Look at verses 4 through 6. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. Let's not forget what Jesus taught about the great day of his coming. He likened it to a dragnet in Matthew 13:47 through 50, where the wicked and righteous are taken together. This is also true of the parable of the tares interpreted in Matthew 13:37 through 43, where this event is likened to a harvest, and all are dealt with together. You don't gather the weeds and wait 1,007 years to put the wheat in the barn. The parable of the talents presents this same picture of the Lord coming back and dealing with the good and evil at that one singular point in time. Well, we have more text to cover, so please join me next week as I take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 15. What a great text on the resurrection. What should we take away from Paul's description? I hope you'll be back for that study.